Welcome to Beyond the Revenue. I am your host, Jeff Klein, and today we're bringing you an episode that circles around the application of AI and accelerating revenue through the funnel and identifying different gaps and weaknesses within to really increase our efficiency through that funnel. I want to quickly introduce our guest today. His name is Dave Govan, and he is a founder and senior principal at Strategic Advisory Services, where he's, again, really focusing on our subject here, which is accelerating revenue through tuning the go-to-market and especially, again, keying into our theme today, AI enablement. Dave has over 23 years experience in executive leadership and mid-level management positions, where he's driven over $2 billion in revenue through public companies, venture-backed companies, and also tech titans. His focus is really on cross-functional leadership through sales, inside sales, marketing, RevOps, consulting, etc. He has an extensive vertical industry experience covering many of the major verticals within our space. And also, what I think makes him unique in a lot of arenas like this is his direct sales experience. He has 10 years as a direct seller, as an enterprise rep, driving new business and also continuing business as well. So with that, I'm super excited to introduce Dave Govan to the show here and look forward to having this wonderful conversation with him. Hey, Dave, it's really great to have you here on Beyond the Revenue. Really excited to dig into some topics with you. And let's start with the top level question I always like to ask folks as we get into things here, which is, what have you been up to since our last conversation?
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. Since we talked last, I've restarted my advisory firm and helping companies accelerate revenue growth and leverage AI. There's a lot of hype around AI. We're getting into the real pragmatic areas of how AI can actually help the company scale and do a better job of adding client value. So that's what I've been up to.
Very cool. Yeah, AI is definitely a hot topic pretty much anywhere. So
Yeah.
good to be diving in now while it's still in a sort of nascent stage, especially in the sales and revenue funnel for sure. You see a lot of expansion into different companies, functionalities, strategies of how and where to use it.
Yes.
Although there are lots of opinions out there, it'll be really exciting to dive into yours as well, especially with your plethora of background and experience. I'm sure it helps you specifically and your consultancy to narrow in where the best applications are that can provide the best value. So maybe let's start there and actually touch on that a little bit. What are some things you're seeing in the market that are working, and maybe even some that you see that are causing, pitfalls or things to avoid as it relates to embedding or using AI within your tech stack? Okay.
Answer that question again. That's a really great question, Jeff. So we're seeing there's a lot of sort of underuse of AI actually right now that I think has a pretty strong opportunity cost for companies. And we're helping demystify AI for the various stakeholders in the companies. And we came up with a training course that's pretty plain spoken English on how they can best use it. And really, I get excited I use Gen AI like constantly. And as you know, I have partnerships with companies like Dex, provide great AI training, and other firms like Loyi provides top of the funnel and account-based marketing, signal research. And there's some really exciting technologies that are going on out there. But most of the pitfalls I see right now is basically an underuse. And that's also an opportunity. Many folks are using it just like as if they were using Google. And with some very basic training, you can actually teach people to leverage AI in a much bigger way. And tasks that could take hours and hours, if not days, can literally be done in minutes. In some cases, an application is appropriate. In other cases, they can just use Gen AI. So we've always been tech forward in our advisory, but now we're really tech forward AI.
Gotcha. And that makes a ton of sense. And, the underutilization piece might be because it's scary.
Yeah.
My experience, just to shed that in here, is just got to try. You just got to jump in and give something a shot. So from that angle, I'm curious, like if you were to give advice to, a startup or a mid-sized company that's really looking to get into it, but's not sure where to start or how to start, what would you recommend to them as a great place to begin that AI journey within their company?
Yeah, I think just hiring someone to deliver some introductory training really literally just a couple of hours virtually could make a massive difference in their productivity, and also teach them that they don't need to be afraid of it. They're not going to break anything, not going to hurt anything. We cover like the different license types and how to make sure your data is protected, of course,
Hmm.
but most companies are aware of that already anyway. And then as we see opportunities for more sophisticated solutions, like for sales training from Dex to Go, or other types of solutions, then we introduce those as well. But I think that it's just kind of embracing it. We've also created an enablement service as well, because after training's done, then like who's available to actually answer questions and help them. And we thought that that would be of value. So it's all fairly new to us and to them, but we're pretty immersed in it, and think we can deliver some pretty strong value, and they'll get a lot out of it. And if there's another firm that they have a relationship with that's involved in the same type of training, they should hire them, because it will definitely make a difference.
Very cool. Well, and
Yeah.
I think one of the key aspects there that you brought up is bringing somebody in to help at first, and it sort of gives you that baseline as you're
That's right.
moving away from that baseline, and let's say you've picked your first project, so to say, that you want to use a technology or embed an AI technology in. What would you say within that are the indicators that the project is being successful? And let me caveat that
Yeah.
question by saying, in normal metrics, take maybe like an SDR technology that helps them research and engage with
Right.
prospects or outbound. Anything that increases their efficiency, the relatability of the messaging, things like that, the response rates, sort of these very traditional SDR metrics. AI allows us to level that up and look at things from different perspectives. I'm curious, from what would you say within that is ways to measure AI at that sort of next level point where, maybe we're looking to increase our response rate. That's one indicator, but
Mhm.
I'm assuming there's something even within that can sort of up level within AI, and maybe it's like a volume based thing or
Yeah.
qualitative measurements or something like that.
So that's a really good question also. So one of the things that's different about our firm is we have operator DNA. We're very pragmatic advisors, not consultants just looking to drive up billings. Essentially, we value management science over mystique. Management science teaches us that taking a data-centric approach is always the best approach in business. So we like to say our data-centric approach replaces wishful thinking. And each department has its own set of metrics already that they've established, which determine whether you're successful or not. The only additional, so monitoring the change between current state and then future state after AI training and enablement will, by watching their KPIs, will tell them what they need to know. And that applies to finance, to HR, to sales, to marketing, all functions.
Hmm.
So I think stick with your KPIs, your metrics, and then just monitor the difference. The one new metric they could adopt is AI aptitude, and that's something that we can easily measure, not as a stick or sort of, penalty, but just to measure how folks are picking up things. And that can be easily measured. And the other thing I'd like to mention here too is what we found is the key to the most successful companies right now who are getting like massive increases in productivity. I'm talking about like 40% plus, is the actual collaboration of the employee with AI. So the
Okay.
employees doing their job, but they're constantly collaborating with AI and using AI in a proper way to drive that productivity. And it really doesn't take a lot of training to affect that. What I've found is someone had to really demystify it, like, kind of dumb it down a bit to really explain how it works. And well, I'm pretty proud that we've come up with an approach that could explain that to almost anyone. Now, certainly, if you have employees that don't use computers or laptops or anything in their job, then it doesn't apply, right? Because there's a lot of like hype around, well, or backlash around, every single employee doesn't need to use AI. I'm like, okay, I buy into that. But every person that's touching a laptop and every person that's a knowledge worker definitely should be. And The nice thing about business is there's a sort of organic flow to business. Things will take care of themselves. So those I've seen it in multiple trends in the industry where people are in denial, and then eventually, believe it or not, I wasn't working then, but there was a time I heard when people were reticent to give up their typewriters. It's like so. It's just change is always scary to people, but once you
Yeah.
help them through that,
You
they get used to it.
cut the cord from it's not attached to the wall anymore.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Groundbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
I grew up and it was still attached to the wall with the little,
Yep.
curly cord that you let
You
go and
go,
it shoots
you
across
went
the room.
around the corner and you find it like a closet with the cord sticking out to have a private conversation. Yeah,
That's right.
I can relate.
Interestingly, and I know sort of circling back to one of the first answers you gave there was about sticking to tried and true metrics in any given group, team, etc. I think one of the opportunities and maybe potentially challenges with AI is going to that next level. So I'll put that to you in two ways. One, a team that has used sort of the same tactical measurements for a while and they're coming into something with AI and they're going to sort of stay in that lane to increase their production through those metrics. Got it.
Okay.
Totally on board. That's a very obvious and important application of AI is being better at what you're already good at to some extent, or improving areas gaps within those metrics within those teams. Going a slightly different direction, if you were using AI to branch out in other ways, or there were a team that maybe new or an approach that's new that doesn't have set metrics yet, we'll call it. What advice would you give to the assumed complexity of trying to crawl, run, and walk at the same time? Meaning you're trying to
Yep.
stand up a team, you're trying to understand what success means, and you're trying to layer in something like AI. Now, I know people will do
I
that. I've
understand the
done that.
question.
So what would you say to folks that are sort of in that position that are doing all of this at once?
I would prioritize what I'm measuring. Like basically doing the top three things really well is always the best formula for success in anything in life, right? There's something about our human brains that three things resonate in our minds. That's why politicians always have 3 points, and there's something about the way we've formed. So that's why I mentioned three.
Yeah.
Could be two. I don't. But let's say it's three. So pick the three things that really matter the most in your business and for your function and measure those. And avoid vanity metrics would be a second recommendation. There's some metrics like page views and clicks and such. Like, okay, like they serve a purpose if you're trying to measure certain aspects of a website. But if you're really trying to measure like growth in a company, it's about conversion and revenue, right? The other thing, it's
Have
important to keep in
those
mind that all businesses, all basically run on a P&L, which is driven off of an income statement. And so that's a fixed kind of ancient set of things that need to be on there, not to geek out in accounting, but it's important that, people do understand how their companies make money, why they have budgets and they don't spend like drunken sailors. But that's why I say like stick with the tried and true. But there are definitely new opportunities. Like take the topic of churn, for example. So one of the classic ways companies have always measured a churn risk, you can account for it after the fact and, gross churn, net churn. But NPS or net promoter score is a classic measurement, right? That comes off of a very defined survey of certain individuals. One, you have to make sure that the right individuals in the customer base, or you're going to get false positives.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But because like it's cumbersome and laborious to measure how we're doing with particular customers, it's like the data's everywhere, hard to get to. Now with AI and agents, we can actually get to that data easier and better. And so we're not going to change the fact that like we're still measuring customer satisfaction, right? Is CSAT is what we're measuring. But NPS now may become only one input. And we might use, we might take all the recorded conversations between the support or customer success organization, dump them into a file, upload them to AI, and ask it to, and then also feed it a spreadsheet of NPS scores and ask it to look for anomalies. Say, hey, are there
Right.
any scores here that ranked high on NPS, but actually were it looks like the account relationship is at risk. There's a churn risk there. And there's many other
Mhm.
examples of that type of
Uh,
work. So we can do like it's a paradigm shift. Like literally, we can do 1,000 times more than we were able to do previously in a very short period of time.
and that's such a smart answer. And I think when you double tap into that too, there's the idea of taking data to the model and saying, analyze this and give me your thoughts. And I'm going to prompt you a handful of
Right.
probing questions to guide you to a set of answers that I'm looking for. Not necessarily the
That's
answer, but categorical answer. I
that
think the evolution of that too then becomes you remove that first step where you're not necessarily taking the data to the model. The model is in your data, right? So that's like that
that's right.
evolution. When you make that jump from optimize or from using AI to optimizing it in your tech stack, it's now part of your tech stack. So you can go into your data model, your data lake, and
That's right.
engage with an AI there that has the relevance of your data
Yes.
and can then go one step further to include activity data, to include
That's right.
perhaps social information that's available through your marketing or CRM that's not reticent in what you would have fed it natively, right? So it's
You're
it's
right.
taking factors that you may have considered, but that first clip may have been too complex to get all into the same. Meanwhile, it's firing off a million times a second, doing all of those logical thought combinations for you. So I think
The
that's
data.
really when you start to step up in your use of AI to really drive
That's that's
answers that are the best for the business, not just an answer that works within the context of the business.
it's really incredible. I mean, you make a really great point. Like the AI that you're using is only as good as the data it's accessing. So if you have a model and application that's isolated to your company's data, you need to make sure that that data is pristine. Where ChatGPT and OpenAI and like technologies offer value is because they have reach into vast amounts of data.
Mm-hmm.
And when they get wonky, it's because it's a subject area where there's not a lot of data on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually live on the site of the country's first military academy in Bedminster, New Jersey, a little village called Pluckerman. And it's not well known that the academy's not that well known, and B, there were some pretty important social events that went on. There was a famous wedding, and Washington was here, etc. So I once asked ChatGPT about it, and it came back pretty off. And then I coached it, and then it found information that was on target. So that's what I mean with collaboration, right? It's like you can't,
Right.
and this is one of the things we train and teach. You can't just outsource your brain to to AI and say, here, you do my job, right? You're
Right.
basically using it as 1,000 assistants that can get all this information, but you're quality control. You're watching it and you're coaching it, etc. But the data is absolutely critical. What's really, I think, incredibly exciting is we can actually now, as business people, think more creatively about how to answer questions, how to provide information, because we're no longer bound by a bias. We're not bound by like some social constraints. We're not bound by the amount of effort it would take. Like when you think about solving a problem, the first thing you think of as a person is how much time is this going to take me? Like, because you're doing a quick measurement of is it worth it, right? Like, yeah, I
Right.
could do any task relatively speaking, but is it going to be worth, is the return on that time going to be worth it? And often it's no. So you take a different approach. AI changes that paradigm. It's basically like, yeah, now that I can actually sample all this different information, I'll give you a simple example. I
Sure.
have an advisory firm. Someone is interested in hiring us, an investor. So they sent us an agreement that was multifaceted, fairly complex. And I understood the agreement. What I didn't know is how does this compare with all these different components? How does that compare to like comparables in the business. So in a private section in ChatGPT, I uploaded the agreement. I asked it a simple question. I used deep research. I asked it a simple question. Tell me how competitive this agreement is compared to other comparables for this type of work, for this type of client. And went off, it chunked for quite a while. I got a little nervous. Maybe, did I break it? And then popped up a 3,000 word answer citing 6 very credible sources and an executive summary that pretty much said, yeah, that's a decent offer. Mm-hmm. Now, that took 10 minutes. If I were sitting here thinking about, let me do some checkpoints on this, right? Maybe I do some verbal checkpoints. I call you up. I try to get on your schedule. I call you up. I say, what do you think of this agreement? I call someone else up. I do some online research. I don't have the time to spend that much time to determine it. But That's right. Just, in literally 10 minutes, while I was working on something else, I jobbed it out. And then I looked at the output. First thing I did was I checked the sources, right? They were credible. So now I'm interested. And then I read it, and there, it wasn't hallucinating, as they say. It was right on target. And that's what I mean by like the ability to actually, for human beings to collaborate and work differently and more effectively. And I'll give you one other example with since this is a podcast for Dex2Go. So Dex2Go provides a sales training and coaching AI app. Do you know how often, and I've been a 6-time CRO, I've been a middle sales manager, I've been a rep, I've been coached and trained. Do you know how often psychological barriers and social constraints get in the way of our communication? We don't want to hurt someone's feelings. One of my former managers, great person, Kim Malone Scott, wrote Radical Candor and has a whole business on consulting for firms on how to coach people on being objective and candid, but in a way that doesn't hurt their feelings. Like, she built a whole business on that. So the average sales leader, sales leaders are so busy to begin with to do a proper job of coaching. But on top of that, there's these social constraints. Sales reps, men and women, have big egos, and they're fragile egos in some ways. And so now you have applied AI that is objective. It's not thinking about it's not trying to hurt your feelings, and it's not trying not to hurt your feelings. It's basically just, you asked it a question, it tokenized the question, it went off to find the most probable best response with some other rules and constraints that Dex2Go fed it, and it's giving you an answer. Mm-hmm. That's really valuable.
If I could double tap into that, well, I don't think you said it directly like this, but I interpreted something you said about objectivity as a particular weakness in, let's just say, a general sales cycle, general sales process. So, we don't want to hurt people's feelings, et cetera, et cetera. If you were working directly with a sales leader, especially given your extensive background in that particular arena, and you were saying, hey, in your sales process, there's not enough objectivity. That's why deals are dragging on. That's why we're missing qualification. We're not listening for the right qualification or asking the right qualification questions, or we're dragging on, opportunities, deals, whatever, for far too long. We can't just cut the cord and be done one way or the other. What would your advice there be to lean into, developing that, objectivity into the sales process so that we can, call done, or have better qualification, or, any of these other major milestones within any seller's cycle?
Yeah, there's 3 things. One, you create a safe environment where facts are facts and honesty is awarded, transparency is awarded. So the leader, the CEO, the CRO, you have to create, the VP of sales, you have to create that kind of environment. They have to know that, people don't get punished for giving objective, honest answers or reports, that it's not an emperor's new clothes environment, right? So you create that. Secondly, you do have to be sensitive, have a high emotional IQ, high EQ, and realize that people are people. So if you're going to critique something, you also have to compliment them. So literally, I forget if it's 4-to-1 or 5-to-1. Basically, find 4 things they're doing well or great, and then the 5th, identify the gap, right? And just say, hey, we need to get better at that. And the 3rd thing is basically the actual numbers, the way things are reported have a very realistic, non-squishy sense to them. So,
Hmm.
for example, when you have forecast stages, make sure the stages are very simple and very clear as to what means what. So closed is always easy because closed is closed, right?
Sure.
But what about booked? I mean, is it booked? So if you're like in a larger company, the difference between closed and booked matters a lot. I mean, matters everywhere, but like because there's a volume, you have either dozens or hundreds of reps. So I've had situations where, up the chain, oh, this is closed, this is closed. And then I would check, excuse me, because there's only so much time left in the quarter. Is it booked? Because if it's not booked, we can't actually recognize the revenue. It could be sitting on somebody's desk waiting to book it. So,
Sure.
and then so that like even with something like closed, right? Like that. And then even at the other end of the funnel, people always like to call everything pipeline, right? Like, oh, it's pipeline. What does that mean actually? Is that pipeline that's like a brand new lead that has been qualified? Let's say there's you use Medic. So, there's 6 aspects that need to be qualified, right? 6 areas. Let's say it's only qualified for one of them or 2 of them. So is it that? Or is this pipeline actually fully qualified? And if that's the case, then why isn't it actually moved down the funnel to be forecasted?
Sure.
So the devil's in the details when it comes to forecasting. And that's what I mean by objectivity. Like, it's like I've gone into multiple situations where I've followed predecessors who didn't do this and it created a mess.
Hmm.
And I came in and I pretty much said, okay, as a new leader, no one is going to get shot for being honest and for calling something what it really is. But if we're BSing each other as we're going through this, then that's when things go sideways because we're
Hmm.
thinking we're thinking an opportunity is one thing at a particular stage, and it's actually not. It's at a different
Yeah.
stage, and that's how quarters get blown. So it's just better to always, like just report objectively.
How do you bake into that, um, playbooks or some might refer to it as like checklists in
Yeah.
order. So let's go back to that sort of pivot point between your sort of lead to pipeline and pipeline to forecastable. Um, you mentioned like setting up a safe space and having an objective measure to it. A lot of that requires precedent.
Yes.
This is what it means to be forecastable. This is what it means to be pipeline. Pick one, or qualified pipeline. I mean, pick one of those pivot points. What is something in there that you would overlay or bake in to say, here's how we define what that is. Obviously, it's unique probably to every company, but I mean the big target things. You mentioned Medic, so
Yeah.
maybe not lean into the methodology, maybe lean more into the to anecdotal, because again, most people know Matic and Bant and all the versions of those.
Yeah. Well, you
But more of the things you would say, well, in no way, shape, or form would X, Y, or Z be qualified coming out of a lead status, or maybe conversely, like here are the 3 things I would suggest you always have when you're moving something out of that lead into pipeline from a
yes.
opportunity perspective.
So you already mentioned the playbook. So as early as possible in a company's journey, they should create a sales playbook. And I've created numerous playbooks for clients. I've created as an operator. And when I say if the organization is larger, I've pulled together the stakeholders on my directs and we work together to develop a organizational playbook. If you're in a startup, there's like 3 or 4 people, then you have to drive that yourself with their input,
Mm-hmm.
but you have a playbook. And the playbook literally goes from the beginning, like, what's our mission? What are our objectives? What are we trying to accomplish? What are our values? How are we going to operate? And then it gets into the specifics of this is our sales methodology or process. A subset of that is how we qualify. A subset of that is how we forecast. And there's usually a page on there, which when I have an organization or advise, which literally outlines the categories and the description of each category. And that goes through every facet, including customer success, sales development, et cetera. Like, so now the org has a playbook and it's a dynamic, document. So next fiscal year, that might be tweaked as the company grows. It will be tweaked. And so how is that used? So now someone is interviewing. During one of the interviews, they're not given because it's company material, company confidential, but they're shown the playbook and kind of walked through the playbook, and particularly emphasis on the sales process. And they're shown the sales process and they're shown the forecasting approach. And then that candidate should be asked, can you commit to operating here within this sales process and this forecast approach? If the answer is, I'm not sure, or, I don't do it like that, then that's, okay, thanks for coming. But I've never seen a candidate not buy into it. And
Sure.
I've only twice, yeah, I've only once or twice seen a candidate forget that they bought into it and then had to be reminded, hey, do you remember when we had this interview, we showed the sales process? You're skipping this one area that is really important. And, you have to shift back. You have to come with the rest of the team and follow that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that playbook doesn't go on a shelf. It's actually living document.
Right.
It's like we live it.
You have to adhere to it. And
You have
if
to
it's
adhere to it.
if it's
That's
not
right.
working, then you change it.
That's right. And so it's not complex. It's not bureaucratic. It's not like too process heavy. I've come across a number of founders that are like real skittish when it comes to stuff like this. Now, we're got a cooler place, man. We like to just flow, as bros. I'm like, look, I get that.
Data looks the same,
You
by
can
the way.
keep that culture. You can keep that culture, but like, we have to have structure if we want to scale. So, but
That's a very
you
good
mentioned
point.
it early. It's all about the playbook.
Yeah, that's a very good point, which is, you kind of have this more freewheeling aspect to the initial stages of growth, but when you really want to hammer on the accelerator, it needs to be repeatable. Repeatable comes with process. It comes with, unfortunately, writing things down, sticking to the script. That
Right.
hyper individualism starts to become off of the margin and into the main page, right? And although you will still have those folks that ignore that from the interview and want to be hyper individualistic and do things their own way. I don't think there's ever avoiding that at any company.
Right.
But I think that in the main, if you're keeping folks to the 80, 90% of process, to my
That's
point
right.
earlier, like your data will also be accurate, predictable, and help then narrow in that other 10 to 20% that's sort of off the seam.
There are,
I'm curious then. Go ahead.
just to
Sorry.
finish the thought, there are plenty of, first of all, I encourage individual creativity in my organizations and advise my clients to do the same thing. In the nature of the business of sales and marketing, there are so many opportunities to express that. So you don't have to, you can follow a structure and a process and still use your creativity in many ways in the overall process. But how the business operates, the business practices, how we forecast, we're not looking for creativity there. That's like,
Right.
I don't know if you ever watched The Bear on Netflix, but compare the later season way the chefs are operating to like the beginning of the first season. First season's chaos and they're all like all over the place. They're now getting it down and they have their menu tight and they have their recipes tight and they're being timed and they're like functioning like a machine that way. They're still creative chefs. They're coming up with new recipes all the time, new ideas.
Sure.
And, and each of the characters are growing that way. But so they still have plenty of time to be creative. It is a business. And, we have to, if we want to scale, we can't have one-off everything.
Right. As my grandmother would say, pasta is pasta, it cooks the same. Right. So what I mean by that is, you could have, the chef could get creative and make their own pasta, but you're not going to then just flop that on a plate and throw some sauce on it.
Right.
You have to cook it. You still have to cook it. Pasta cooks the same.
That's
All
right.
pasta cooks the same, right? It goes in boiling water for a certain amount of time, and then you pull it out and serve it, right? There's always that. And I sort of,
like, we don't cook it, put it in a drawer, wait till someone orders it, reheat it, and serve it. Why? It gets sticky and gluey. I know a little bit about cooking pasta myself. Anyway.
Well, I think as you spin that conceptually back into the individualism spectrum, just to clarify for those listening.
Yeah.
When you I would equate that to something along the lines of, you're at the finish line with an opportunity and suddenly you realize that the person on the other end has zero authority. What did you miss? Well, in our playbook, we talk about what it means to qualify a deal, and we understand the, if you go through like a methodology
Yeah.
again. You've got that understanding of who is the authority to sign. And you've been pitching, meeting, talking to, emailing, quoting the wrong person for the last months, whatever. Suddenly to have that moment. And that's that is where I focus on hyper individualism to say, you've got yourself a really great friend on the other end of the phone. You missed the initial question, which is like, who are you?
Right.
What are you to this? The other qualifying questions, which by the way, still have your buddy. They're your champion. They're the ones selling it for you there. But how do you turn that person north to their hierarchy earlier so that you don't have that uh-oh moment when it's like, oh, well, yeah, I got to go talk to my boss about this a month and a half in. It's like,
So
shoot.
yeah, so
Well,
we
that's where deals go to die.
that's an excellent example of, and I am sorry to say it happens so often. What we can do to help prevent it more is train our people, make sure they understand how critical it is, because they're going to waste their time and they're going to add risk to their financial wellness, the companies, the teams, the companies, et cetera. The way to avoid it is this culture of transparency and having managers and leaders who actually have their heads in their business. They should know and be doing, fairly frequent opportunity reviews and forecast reviews and asking those right questions like, so who is the economic buyer? And then, if you have multiple layers of management, you sort of you should be in a mindset where like certain size deals actually get quality checked by the different levels. Like if, for example,
Good point.
if I was a CRO and someone put like I don't know, 500K to million to 2 million to 5 million to $10 million opportunity in there, that conversation's happening. And then I actually go into LinkedIn and look up the person's name and look at their job title. And then I can tell if there's disparity there. Like, I don't think a director is going to have the authority for a $5 million spend. So who is that? But, if it was like 100K, I'd be, okay, yeah, I could see that. But the point is like, as the cycle's progressing, there's all these internal checkpoints that should be occurring. So why does it happen so often then? Sometimes people, managers and leaders get what we call on the street in New York, happy ears. They hear good news. They lack a certain healthy level of paranoia and they don't dig deeper. So that can happen. Sometimes you have actually an A player rep who's never wrong and they're really busy and you've checkpointed like most of their deals, but there's this one deal and maybe it's like maybe they're closing like 400K, 800K deals. And there's one deal that's like 100K. And you focused on 5 of their 6 opportunities, but you didn't focus on that one because you trust them and they're so busy that they actually missed that point, right? Like, and they thought, well, it's only 100K. So I thought this manager could actually buy that. So there's this human element that plays out. We're not, no one's perfect. So we try to create structures and environments where we have as much visibility as we can. There's as much scrutiny as there can be without making it a negative workplace and demotivating our teams. So sometimes things happen, but if they're happening more often than not, it's actually more than just the sources issue. It's actually management's issue too, because there's a lack of scrutiny.
So when you bring everybody back to the table, what are actionable things that a leader within a business at any level could do to get sales teams, sales managers around that common playbook? You mentioned some of these before, but I kind of want to just double tap into the I don't want to use the word policing, but it almost approaches that. Like, how do we get everybody on the same page? And then how do we keep people on that page?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any business. We call it inspection, a deal inspection. And it's like just really like educating the team that any business we would have, if we were coming up with a final product, we're going to have inspection. It could be QA in manufacturing. It could be, if we were running a vineyard, someone's tasting the batch, before it's bottled. Like we're doing that in our business. We're responsible for this crop of deals, or like So we have to have a culture, and the tone should be helpful, by the way. It shouldn't be negative. It should be like, we want to help. Like there's
That's right.
some analogies are used, like it's you're fishing for big fish and you get it close to the boat. There's other people to help you get it inside the boat. It's a team effort,
Hmm.
right? Which I believe in. I've rolled up my sleeves and been called in many situations to help. So, but it's, it's helping educate them to do that. Now I'll go back to AI for a moment. I'll mention one other thing. So I used an AI tech for forecasting, and I won't mention the vendor now, but I'm a big fan of the vendor and a big fan of what they do. And so they take the CRM data into their system, and then they monitor email exchanges, file attachments, calendar appointments, how many times deals are updated or not updated, what the changes were, and they use a predictive model to determine opportunity health. And there's a query you can run, which is basically what's changed. So in some of the larger orgs that I've been part of and leading, I've used that literally daily. I would have their dashboard on my large monitor on my desk. And, once a day I'd run a what's changed query, and I'd look at the data. I'd look at the health scores. So now as a top leader, I have my head very deep into the business. I know what's going on. And I encourage my VPs on my team and the managers and the reps to all pay attention to what that's telling us. So if you're a rep on a deal and your opportunity health has dropped significantly, that should translate into tasks when you come into the
Right.
office on Monday, right? You need to
Right.
reevaluate your deal and see if you're actually positioned at the right level, or if there's a new competitive challenge, if your champion is actually coming through for you, or are they more of a coach, not really getting you what you need. So there's another example of where AI can actually be very helpful. And I would suspect, I haven't tried it yet, but I would suspect Gen AI, if you uploaded certain deal information and status reports, it could probably give you some pretty good insight as well. But you need a specialized AI app to do it, because you need a timestamp, that timestamp
Hmm.
sequence of, is the communication on the deal progressing at this stage, or is it decreasing, stalled, whatever.
Right. You
So
have the,
anyway,
it's
just to mention.
dimensional in that way that you have to have the time
Correct.
scale.
Yeah.
So that was a great wrapper back to AI. I'm curious, when we've talked a lot about the reaction to individuals within the go to market motion, and it's not meant to be a pick on Bob. It's a
Right.
let's help Bob. What do you tend to do when you start to see systemic issues and it's not an individual, to improve X, Y, or Z within your motion?
So what you're asking is if there's a systemic problem across the organization, not just a particular individual.
That's correct. You could go with I can give you an example. Like, let's say we're noticing a lot of deals die sort of mid funnel because we're not getting
Yeah.
things qualified the right way.
Understood.
So that is not Bob's issue. That is the
Right.
company's issue as a broad systemic issue. And of course, anytime you raise your conversion rate mid funnel, it's going to have dramatic effects further down funnels. Those are always great
Right.
places to tap in and say, well, let's improve this little metric right here in the middle. Not little in that sense, but little in the it's just like one box. So like, as an example, you don't have to use that in your answer, but I'm curious, like, when you see something or you start to see a trend like that, which again, AI can help identify, how do you lean into that as a leader to really, drive that
So
change?
yeah, the goal is to affect and assist on change management, right? At the end of the day, we want happy, productive people who are making the changes they need to make to improve results, or to do more of what they're doing well. So, I've been an operator and advisor. I'm going to talk as an advisor for a moment. So we engage as objective, non-disruptive advisors. So we interview different stakeholders and get copies of data that help us identify those issues, and then we analyze them and we determine the root causes and what we think the corrective action is, and then we go back and collaborate with our clients to synthesize on those findings, because every business is unique. So sometimes there could be a false positive reading or something,
Mhm.
and assist on change management. And that could be providing some training or ongoing coaching and support. So we're always influencing clients and their teams around, a positive outcome. Now, as an operator, you do similar work, but you're part of the organization. You could be the leader, or you could be, a middle manager. You still can influence the organization. You just need to understand what the objectives are of the organization, what the culture is like, and then what kind of expose those gaps and issues in a positive way with coming up with possible solutions. And that's like, management 101 is, if you identify a problem, identify a solution. It may not be the right solution, but at least you identified a solution, right? So it takes experience. I will say, similar to physicians, right? Like, someone could have a cough and go to the doctor. And if it's a newer physician, they may miss certain things, and a very experienced physician would know. Let's say, for example, it's like, I'm allergic to mold spores. I'm not allergic to many things, but mold spores make me cough. They're little, microscopic. And if there's certain parts of San Francisco, if I hang out in too long, I start coughing. Now, if I went to the doctor and they just moved there and they're fairly new and they don't really understand San Francisco, they'll miss that totally. They'll say, give me some cough medicine. Really, what I need to do is I need to move out of that neighborhood. I need to, there's microclimates in San Francisco. There's some areas of the city are like lots of sunshine. And then there's other little neighborhoods where they get fogged in for hours every single day.
Huh,
Those neighborhoods are
interesting.
tricky for me. So what's the point? The point is, like, it takes some experience to be able to tell what's going on. Like, in my opinion, the more experience you have, the faster you should be able to pick up on things. But even if you're a newer experienced person, there's some pretty basic data. Like, one of the things that I always recommend, let's say you're using HubSpot or Salesforce for CRM, there's a natural feature you can turn on which shows the elapsed time at each stage of opportunity stage. So you have opportunity X, and you have like 8 stages as it's going from, top of the funnel to close. You can literally click a button and turn on the elapsed time between stage. A lot of people don't have it turned on, which I don't understand, because you can literally turn that on and look at it, and you can see where a lot of deals are stalling. And usually you're right in you almost led the witness a bit, because if there's a problem downstream in the selling and the closing, it's usually, the root cause is usually earlier in the cycle. They missed something. Something was missed in the discovery call. Something was missed in the qualification. In the middle of the cycle, where if it's an enterprise sale and there's a hierarchical selling or multi-stakeholder selling, and 2 stakeholders who were critical were missed. Either they weren't identified, or they were identified and not touched because someone assumed they didn't have much influence, but it turns out that culture, they're very influential. Competition spending time with them, you aren't. You're going to lose that opportunity. So it's kind of cool. It's like solving a puzzle. It's like but the data, usually it's all about the data. The data speaks volumes. It jumps out at you if you know what to look for.
It can also tell you that your process isn't working,
Yeah,
or that you lack attachment
that's
to
right.
it.
Well, that's why,
So,
literally, like, I'll give you one quick tactical story. So I was a consultant in this one early stage company, and then they hired me to build an organization for them. So I did. And I noticed that this one group focused on SMB had a really poor conversion rate when they got to pricing. And so I'm like, that's really weird, because usually when you get to pricing, like, they're pretty interested. And I found that the newer employees in that group were actually emailing the pricing. They weren't having a conversation with the buyer. Now, this is
okay.
B2B enterprise. It's a startup, but it's B2B enterprise, right? So I was like, okay, you guys realize that when you have a conversation in enterprise solution, you really want to have an interactive discussion, because what you're really trying to accomplish is cost value alignment. When you sell an enterprise solution, that's the key thing, is you're
Such
there
a
to
great point.
align cost with value. And based on tech, there's usually a lot of flexibility on how to do that for different types of SaaS licenses or packaging or whatever, right? So anyway, I noticed that. And so as the leader, I went back into the one pager sales process inside the playbook, and I added a line item, which was, do not email pricing. And I
Seems
highlighted it in
simple
red.
enough, right?
Yeah, I highlighted it in red. It literally, like, so it got to that part of the sales process where it was like, pricing and negotiation. And if you scroll down, I think it was like step 7 or something, all of a sudden there's a new one. I called a meeting and I said, hey, we updated our sales process. So just asking you folks to be careful not to just email pricing. Now, if you already had the negotiation conversation and you came to agreement, then you email pricing. But don't just try to negotiate over email. Email was meant to be one-to-many communication. It's the least influential form of communication on the planet. And you're trying to reach agreement on cost value alignment. So this is why you don't want to do it. And if you follow that, your results will change. So we put it into play and they stopped doing that and the issue got resolved. So their close rate went up significantly because they weren't doing it. So that's like one tactical example. So there's an opportunity when you look at problems and challenges of where things are getting stuck or what's wrong. I'll give you one other one that's, I think, really cool that I came up with a long time ago. So some tech companies have pre-sales engineers in sales. Not all of them, but some of them. If you're selling something more complex, you tend to have a pre-sales engineer, an SE, right? And so in established organizations, there's an SE manager or director, or many of them, or in a large company, a whole organization of them. And they track internally the utilization of their SEs. They track them. So if Jeff is an SE out of Boston, Jeff is basically tracked in terms of how much time Jeff's being utilized and by whom. So that data, it usually exists. If it doesn't exist, they should start doing it. However, I realized that data could be a very valuable metric and KPI to me as a sales manager at the time, because I could tell by looking at that who's using most of my SE resources, which reps are using the least amount, and who's kind of in the middle. And so I went to the VP and I asked if his org could produce that for me. And he was like, well, we could, but why? Why do you want that information? You're not managing them. I said, no, I'm not managing them. I'm managing their colleagues. But if you give me that data, I can better manage sales productivity, because in this sales process, there's no way in hell you can sell anything without the use of an SE. So if I have reps who aren't using SEs, and I'll give you one exception to this, but that means they don't have enough opportunities. And if I have reps that are using too much SE time, it means there's a training gap there. They're leaning on them too heavily, right? But if they're just right in the sweet spot, then we're good. Now, the one exception is sometimes an SE will move from SE world to become a rep. When that happens, they're their own SE.
Yeah.
And still they should rely on other SEs to give demos, because there's other work to be done as a rep. So
I was going to say that's not always the sales motion that you want them doing.
Correct. It does help identify whether they're doing enough sales rep work versus SE work, but they tend to be lower on utilization. Anyway, so I started doing that quite a long time ago, and it was really valuable. And then they started, the VP of the SE started sharing it with other sales leaders, and they started using it. And then I've kind of tracked that in the operational orgs that I've had, and also recommend that to clients if they have enough if they have SEs at all, or if they have enough SEs. But that's just another simple example of how you can think, holistically about how all the pieces come together and what type of data is out there to help us identify problems and get better.
Right. Because your attestation to that might not have been because you were looking at the utilization of SEs, right? That is contributing to something else, conversion rate, pricing accuracy, these sorts of things. So that's a full circle where you have a problem and the solution is entirely unrelated, in the sense that it's an indirect influence on X, Y, or Z downstream. And those are always, to your point about having the experience or the acumen to know to connect those, comes with experience. But of course, experimentation often leads you to that experience as well, which is like, well, I'm not really sure how to fix this, so let's try increasing SE utilization to see if that influences, pre-qualification, qualification, pricing, whatever it is you're trying to drive there. But it's not always a one lever fix, generally.
Correct.
Especially
having
in sales
done the
with
job
humans.
myself, having been a rep and worked closely with SEs, I knew what good looked like. I knew what healthy looked like. And then as a sales manager, I was interested in monitoring sales productivity. And, people always tell you at every level of job what you want to hear. They always tell you that. And sometimes the activity information can also give a picture that's like, wow, this team's very active. But if you dig a layer deeper into what are they active on? What are they actually like? If you think about the stages in a sales process, and the question is like, what are they actually spending time on? Trusting them, but verifying with the data. And so it's that verification that sometimes, like I've done this in larger organizations. I've had people do this in larger organizations, and I've looked at the data, and we found that we had a not a good team together. We had a rep with an SC that liked to play a lot together, you know, and that they were both falling down in terms of their productivity, and it was hurting that particular team. So we made a change in terms of the assignments, right? So you're going to work with a different SC, and because the SC's income, they're less leveraged. They're usually on a 70th plan or 80/20 plan, but their income is 20 or 30% depending on how well the rep's doing. So if you have like a solid SE, they're another person that's encouraging the rep to follow the process, to, put in the right amount of effort, et cetera, to be successful. And then the best reps actually put a lot of pressure on the SEs to deliver and to provide, because they're dependent on them. So it's this healthy team interdependency. I won't say codependency, but there's this healthy interdependency between those two functions. And you could apply that to CSMs and reps and all sorts of support, all sorts of functions. That's right. To figure out whether we're actually executing the way we could be executing, and avoiding pitfalls and gaps and process disconnects, which come back to haunt us.
Yep. Shows up in all sorts of places then. Not
Yeah.
just in your funnel, but
that's right.
Even in like customer satisfaction, to your point earlier about, CSAT and NPS is, you start to see customer input show up negatively.
Yes.
After it's something they need, but they don't appreciate the sales experience they had, or they don't feel like they implemented correctly because somebody didn't listen to the things that they were saying, or so on and so forth. But yeah, I've seen that often as well, that tends to be also where it can start showing up, which obviously then is a red flag for retention.
I'll give you one gem. I'll give you one gem there.
Gotcha.
If you are measuring CSAT through a survey, make sure the people you're measuring actually have hands-on keyboards touching your product and or own the cost center that's funding your product. Because the way tech works, and I've been bitten by this once or twice myself, the way tech works is you may sell something to one center, a different group might use it, and yet a different ops group, like tech ops or IT ops, may actually be the main point of contact post-sale. So if your main point of contact post-sale is not either the economic buyer or connected to the economic buyer or the users, make sure that if you're measuring CSAT, you spread your sample to include those sources, and you're guaranteed to know realistically how you are doing in that account. If you don't do that and you rely just on the customers, people who support what you sold, then you have a massive blind spot. You might have like great NPS scores, mid 90s, great news, great rapport, but whether that account's going to churn or not, you have no idea, because you're not talking to the people who are getting value from what you sold them, or the people who actually spent money on it. You're talking to the support people, the technical support people, who keep it going and interact with your support people. And while that might sound like a farce, believe me, it's more common than you can imagine.
I'm absolutely sure, because your champion is very often the person that's actually like driving the signature.
Correct.
Or owning the signature, not drive. They are driving the signature, but owning the signature, or the implementer or direct tangible beneficiary of said program, like CRM as an example.
Right. So my recommendation is survey broadly. Don't just accept input from just the support folks, because it could bite you. And then just the other point on what you had mentioned is, in the CSM world, renewals, cross-sell, upsell, really critical, right? And there's a lot of amazing CSM folks out there, but there's also some folks, they're great people, but they think they're in support. It's not a support. Support is part of what they do, but there's a separate support organization.
Hmm.
The purpose of CSMs is to make sure the customer is maximizing the value of what they were sold. So that means that the use case they were sold, they're getting the full value of there's additional use cases they can be presented with, which could drive additional upsell fees or cross-sell additional products.
Hmm.
That's what CSM should be focused on. And I've seen a lot of folks who are, and that's great. And I've seen some that aren't, that are literally they transferred from support. They maybe didn't get the training they needed, and they're still in that support mindset. You need something fixed, I'll fix it for you. But as far as like how they're actually using it, the value they're getting, et cetera, that's not happening. So
Some of that might also be due to how you're measuring what that means
yeah,
to a large way, right? Like, are you identifying or keying into the right metrics that say this is an optimized customer that will likely not churn? You know,
that's right.
you're probably missing something in that measurement scheme if that's the case. And to your point, they are service minded people, but it is not a service role. It is very much a continuity,
Yeah,
retention, focused role, and an expansion. To that end is what else should they have to continue to optimize, whether that's
that's right.
additional products, additional use applications, or seats, for lack of better, in some cases. That almost inevitably grows with the business, though in the same vein, if you're constantly focused on fixing, you're not focusing on growing. So that's a
Yes,
big disparity in that CSM world that I see quite frequently as well. And
that's
that's a
true.
that's a stark on point there.
Yeah, and you need everyone bought in. Like product has to be bought in, engineering needs to be bought in, customer success, sales, everyone needs to be bought into like, hey, we're here for the customer, not the other way around.
Right.
And as long as we're reflecting that in our behavior and we're listening to them and we're evolving and, getting better and helping them more, they're going to see that commitment and they're going to stick with us. But I've also seen the sort of too cool for school attitude where it's like, customers always complaining and customers this and like blaming the customer, right? Now,
Mhm.
occasionally you come across an insane person. I mean, they're out there. So it happens. I get that. But in most cases, they're complaining to try to help you actually. Like
Yeah.
they have real issues and if the issues don't get addressed and they don't get addressed and they don't get addressed and they don't get addressed, then you're going to hear lots of complaints and eventually you're going to vote we're there for them. It's not the other way around. So that's part culture, part measurement, as you mentioned, part process, training, and just to be able to affect a positive outcome there.
Yeah. Well, I know we're scooting up on past time here
Yeah.
for recording, but I always love to sort of bring this back to a more personal note for me as we wrap here, which is always, I'm been in RevOps, sales ops, et cetera, for the majority of my career. And often, I feel like there are different entry points to this. You sort of either fall into it or you're crazy enough to just want to do it. But, they come through either, to your point about being a seller, through the vein and or perspective of a seller that just wants to make things better, operationally minded, et cetera, or they come through the sort of tech tree and end up in a more operator role with that tech background. And in some cases, you have the analyst path, I suppose, in there as well. But I would see the other two being the more common. So as folks that are sort of in one of those two paradigms right now that are looking to pivot, that are looking to be involved in revenue operations or make that career shift, like what is a piece of advice that you would give to them in that position in their career to make that pivot?
And when you say pivot to revenue operations, do you mean RevOps as classic RevOps, or do you mean sales, or do you mean
You, you
SC,
could
or
you could say like you're in a non-operator role and you want to pivot to more of an operator role. So you're a AE and you've noticed ways to improve things. You can't really do that as a seller. You bring them up. Somebody says, here's an opportunity to go and fix all those things. Here's a fancy new sales operations title that we're going to give you. It's sort of in that vein. Like, what would you advise to folks that are wanting to make that sort of a pivot?
So, in other words, someone who's in sales and wants to move into RevOps.
Yeah, we can call it that.
Okay. I think that's my advice would be to really learn how the business functions. Uh, So talk to your colleagues, talk to colleagues in finance, talk to colleagues in operations and deal desk, RevOps, different functions. Talk to them when you're interacting with them. Have chats with them about their jobs and how things are going and different aspects. Really accumulate knowledge of how the whole thing works together. And that starts with like the CEO and board's mission. What are we really trying to accomplish here as a company? What's the vision? What's the long-term vision of the company? Then what's the mission? What are the goals? What the objectives we're trying to accomplish this year, 2 years, 5 years? So you understand like that big picture. Understand how the different, they don't have to get like super deep, but just understand as much as they can about how the business is actually functioning and operating. So, ask simple questions. Don't be annoying. Don't delay people, but like ask simple questions like, why do we have a business practice for this? Not that I fully support it, but like, I'm just curious. Well, why is this our business practice? Right. And just learn that. And then that's going to give you like a good orientation to how everything's kind of functioning together. And then if you feel like your personal purpose is better served in supporting the front office from a RevOps standpoint and enabling the front office, making good process changes, recommending process change, helping with tech stack, optimizing different facets of the RevOps function, whether it's forecasting or deal desk or
Bringing in AI.
applying AI, right? I mean, like there could be a new position there, the AI enablement position, right? Like, but the point I'm making is like, you have to want to, like if it's like a science fiction starship and someone's in the engineering room, like basically making sure that ship is functioning, right? Like if you want to be there, if that fulfills you, then that's great because that's a very important job. But you have to want that, and you have to have a passion for it. And it's pretty cool. It's, you're constantly solving puzzles and problems and issues and helping that way. And then there's one last thing too. You have to be willing to sacrifice, like at the end of a quarter or end of a fiscal year. Like you got to be able to sacrifice personal time, late nights, and sometimes weekends.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that I've always set up as a CRO at the end of each quarter is a Teams or Slack with the right stakeholders on it, which includes finance and legal and RevOps and I'm on that. Like we're all monitoring that like till sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning at the end of a quarter because maybe if there's a deal stuck or whatever, we're trying to help. And RevOps is like they're the ones actually going to the deal desk or going to finance or wherever. And when I say going to, like either by cell phone or through the Teams or Slack, the outsiders view a lot of these jobs as cushy. Oh, they're in the sales organization or they're in the sales and marketing org or whatever. That's cushy. The exact opposite is the way it is. I mean, we're like every job is a bit of a grind.
If they think your job is cushy, you're probably doing the right things.
Yeah, right.
Because the perspective
Exactly.
is it's a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've always
And if
taken
that's the
great
case,
care.
then what are they actually doing? Well,
That's right.
the reason
I've
that
always
you're
taken great
complaining
care to
is the
recognize.
reason that they're there.
Yeah. No, you're right. As a leader, I've always taken great care to recognize my RevOps orgs and the teams, and sometimes even orgs adjacent. Like I had to go to a conference in London, stopped by Ireland to take out to lunch a group of people that weren't in my org, but they were in adjacent org, and they were critical to our success, just to recognize us, just to show them as a leader, I value and appreciate what you're doing because our overall success is dependent, on, and they're in Shannon near the airport, Shannon, Ireland. And they really appreciated that, like they don't get that usually that type of treatment, but I feel like everyone who contributes deserves to be respected and recognized and appreciated. Anyway, long answer to a pretty concise question. So sorry about that, but
No, it's all
Those are
good.
my thoughts.
Well, I greatly appreciate that answer. I think it's as people find themselves in a place to make a transition like that, it's often scary, and sometimes having that a foundation or a framework, for lack of better, to approach it like you laid out there, I think is super helpful to folks as they're looking. And I get approached, and I'm actually involved with the mentorship program that sort of advises people in that transition phase or in their young age
Mhm.
of this in their career. So I think it's helpful for those folks to hear messages like that as well, which is very much like, understand the broader business objectives and how those are impacting your team or teams around you, and optimize how you're approaching those through the various things even that we've talked about today.
Yeah,
So
I'll
greatly
mention
appreciate
one
it.
other.
And
Thanks, I appreciate
go ahead.
that you saying that. I'll mention one other quick thing since we were talking about AI. That's yet another great use case for AI. So if you have your private Gen AI, which is protected within your data set, right? Not out in the general public. You can feed your business practices and your policies, create a project, ChatGPT, create a project, takes 2 seconds, upload the documents on your business practices, your rules, your legal, whatever, policies, legal policies,
Mhm.
discount policies, etc. You could just upload that right into a project. And then basically when, a rep or a RevOps person or someone has a deal, they just literally go into the prompt, type the deal terms, ask it, is this going to be consistent with our overall, business practices
Mhm.
and legal policies? And it'll chunk through just that information. It'll come back in 10, 20 seconds and it'll tell you. Now, again, you have to collaborate. So you have to look at the response, have to make sure it didn't,
That's
right?
right.
And it will get better as, as it goes on. In the beginning, it'd probably be pretty good. Might even be really, 100% because there's not that much data it has to go through to actually get the answer.
Mhm.
And then there's other things you can do with prompting, like telling it who to be and who the recipient of the answer is, right? Like, act as our chief financial officer, or act as our head
That's right.
legal counsel, or act as our head of business practices, act as our head of RevOps, like that type of thing. And analyze this deal and customers asking for this. Let me know. It's a very simple use case, but like that could save a lot of time, and
Mhm.
then they could even checkpoint that, like when they get the answer they could Slack their RevOps or manager, or if it's a rep they could Slack their RevOps person and say, hey, I asked ChatGPT this question, I got this answer, I want another opinion, is it on target? Yes, no,
Mhm.
okay. So anyway, sorry, I it's just
Very
was
interesting.
thinking about
No,
that,
you're right.
but just to kind of sum it all up, what we've been talking about, this is the opportunity we have in front of us. And it's like probably the biggest productivity opportunity we've ever seen in our lifetimes. And if we collaborate well, we're going to kind of reap some really serious rewards by leveraging AI.
Yeah. Don't leverage it as a copy paste. It's a collaborator
No, it's not
towards an
Google
output.
search. It's not Google search. It doesn't replace your brain. I mean, it literally, that's why I like to say we demystify it, because it's taking what you type, it's cutting it up into what are called tokens, it's putting a number to it, and it's looking at its data sources to find the matching token numbers that are highly probable to match up to be a good answer or response to that string. That's what it's doing. Now, models get trained also, so like there's other training and code, which, if then else statements and things that people can layer on top of it. But at its, that's what Gen AI is doing, like, so I know like with Dextago, they're feeding it a lot of other experienced expert sales coaching and training advice on top of that core capability. But at the end of the day, if users understand this isn't some genie in the sky, this isn't some like just nonstop pre-canned answers, if they really just understand like what it's doing at a simple level, then they can say, okay, I can figure out how to collaborate with this.
Yeah. How to make it smarter to make you smarter, in effect.
Exactly. So fun times ahead, and I'm looking forward to keeping up with you and seeing how you're doing. And I appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate your time as well, and I know the audience is going to enjoy all the tidbits you've provided in here, and especially your stories and driving it back to how you impacted change. So I can't wait to keep up with you as well and see how things are coming along.
I'm glad. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Appreciate it.
All right.
Take care of yourself.
You the same. Take care,
Bye.
Dave.